The snow had started again by the time I pulled into the driveway. Not heavy, just that thin, persistent kind that coats everything by morning without you noticing it happening. I remember thinking it was earlier than I'd planned. I'd left the city a full hour ahead of schedule because the forecast said worse was coming, and at 63, I don't gamble with winter roads the way I used to. The cottage sits on Morrison Lake, about 2 hours north of Ottawa. My wife Evelyn and I bought it in 1991, the year after our son was born. We'd scraped together every dollar we had. Evelyn wanted a place where the kids could run without concrete under their feet. She got her wish. We spent 30 summers up there. She passed in 2019, and I haven't been able to sell it. I don't think I ever will. I noticed the car before I even killed the engine. A dark blue Subaru, parked on the far side of the lot, tucked in close to the tree line like whoever left it there was hoping the spruce would swallow it up. I didn't recognize it. I sat in my truck for a moment with the heat running, trying to place it. My son drives a gray pickup. His wife drives a white SUV. My daughter lives in Vancouver. No one else had a key. No one else was supposed to have a key. No one else was supposed to have a key. I almost called out when I stepped onto the porch. Old habit. You spend enough years arriving at a place and you just announce yourself. But something stopped me. I don't know what exactly. A feeling. The kind that settles into your chest before your brain is finished working out what's wrong. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly. The fire was going in the wood stove. Someone had stacked it well. It was throwing good heat. 2 glasses of red wine on the coffee table. A coat I didn't recognize hanging over the back of the armchair. A man's coat. Dark wool. Expensive looking. Not my son's size. I heard them before I understood what I was hearing. The bedroom down the hall. Evelyn's bedroom. The one where she kept her stack of library books on the nightstand. The one with the old quilt her mother had made. The one I still haven't changed the pillows on because they still smell faintly like her shampoo. I stood in the hallway and I didn't move. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that the fire popped twice and the wind picked up outside. Long enough that I understood exactly what was happening and still couldn't make myself go forward or back. You think you know how you'd react in a moment like that. You don't. You just stand there in the dark hallway of your dead wife's bedroom while the snow falls outside. And everything you thought you understood about your family does something slow and quiet inside you. I went back to the living room. I sat down in the armchair, moved that coat to the floor without looking at it, and I waited. She came out first. My daughter-in-law. I'll call her by what she was to me, my son's wife. She was wearing his old university sweatshirt, the Carlton one he'd had since first year. She saw me and her face went through 5 or 6 things in about 2 seconds. Then it settled on something I can only describe as calculation. Not guilt. Calculation. I can explain, she said. You don't need to, I said. The man behind her had the decency to look ashamed. Mid-40s, I guess, well-dressed even in the scramble. That coat in the living room was his, clearly. He stood in the hallway and did not speak. I didn't speak to him either. He was not the problem I was focused on. I need you not to say anything to him, my son's wife said. Please, he doesn't need to know about this. This was nothing. It was one time. I looked at her. I've known her for 11 years. I was at the hospital when their 2 kids were born. I've sat across from her at Christmas dinner and Easter and Thanksgiving, and more ordinary Sundays than I can count. I watched my son build his whole life around her. How long? I said. She didn't answer right away. That was its own answer. Please, she said again, think about the kids. I looked at her for a long moment. I am, I said. Then I looked at the man standing behind her, and I said, very calmly, you need to leave now. He left. He didn't say a word, just picked up his coat from the floor where I'd dropped it and walked out. I heard the Subaru start up and pull out of the lot. And then there was just the wind and the wood stove, and my son's wife standing in the middle of my living room. Please don't tell him, she said. Her voice had gone quieter. The calculation had softened into something closer to real fear. I won't do anything tonight, I said. Go home to your children. She tried to say something else. I held up my hand. Go home. She left. I sat by the wood stove for a long time after that. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pace. I just sat there watching the fire and thinking about my son, about the way he works 60-hour weeks as a site supervisor for a civil engineering firm outside of Gatineau, about how he talks about saving up for a bigger place so the kids can each have their own room, about the way he still calls me on Sunday evenings just to check in, the way his father before him never did. I thought about what kind of man he needed me to be right now, and I thought about the man in the Subaru. I hadn't recognized him. But I'd seen that car before. It came to me slowly. But 6 weeks earlier, my son had mentioned something in passing. A conversation he'd had with a colleague about a dispute at work. Something about a contract being awarded unfairly. Something he'd been frustrated about. He'd mentioned a name. I'd half listened the way you do. But the car. I'd seen that Subaru in the parking lot of the arena where my grandson plays hockey, parked next to my son's gray pickup. And I'd seen the man who got out of it. I'd watched him shake my son's hand. He wasn't a stranger. He was a coworker. My son had spent those evenings believing he was at a mandatory safety certification course being held in Pembroke 3 weekends in a row. He'd told me about it. Said it was a pain, but the company required it. His wife had told him she'd manage fine with the kids. I went outside and stood on the dock. The snow had stopped. The lake was black and the sky was clearing and everything was very still. I made one decision that night. I was not going to call my son. Not yet. I was going to make a different call first. It took me until the next morning to find what I needed. I know my way around a computer well enough. I retired 2 years ago from 30 years in federal public service, and I spent the last decade of that in policy work, where you learn to find things. I found him to my son's work, a contractor listed on an infrastructure project, a company with a registered address in Canada. From there, it wasn't difficult. Public records. LinkedIn. A company bio on a small engineering firm's website that listed him as a senior project manager. And a wife. Her name was listed in a community fundraiser write-up from a Canada Neighborhood Association, a charity hockey tournament of all things. She'd organize it. There was a contact email. I sat with my coffee at the kitchen table in the cottage, and I thought about what I would want someone to do for me. If Evelyn had ever, which she wouldn't have. I know that as well as I know anything. But if she had, and if someone had known, and had stayed quiet to spare themselves the awkwardness. I wrote the email. I didn't write it in anger. I want to be clear about that. I've never been a man who does things in anger. My father was, and I watched what it cost him, and I made a choice early on to be something different. I wrote it the way I would have wanted to receive it, plainly, without drama. I told her who I was. I told her what I had seen. I told her that I was sorry to be the one to send it, and that I understood if she needed time before she responded, and that if she wanted to speak by phone, I would be available. I sent it at 9:17 in the morning on a Thursday. Then I drove back to Ottawa. I said nothing to my son for 10 days. That was the hardest part. He called on Sunday as he always does. We talked for 40 minutes about the hockey season, about a kitchen renovation he was planning, about whether we thought the Senators had any real hope this year. I listened to his voice, and I thought about what was sitting underneath everything he didn't know, and I kept my voice steady, and I said nothing. On the 11th day, my son called me in the middle of a weekday afternoon. That never happens. Dad, he said, I need to talk to you. His wife had told him. Not the whole truth, I found this out later, but enough. She'd told him there had been someone, that it was over, that she was sorry. She'd framed it as a confession, a controlled one. The version she'd decided he should have. I drove to Gatineau that evening. My son opened the door, and he looked like he hadn't slept since Sunday. He's 34 years old, and he looked 50. I came in and I sat across from him at his own kitchen table while his kids were upstairs with their grandmother. His wife's mother had come, which told me something about how my son's wife was positioning herself for what came next. He asked me if I knew. I told him yes. I told him I'd been at the cottage. I told him what I'd seen. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't describe details he didn't need. But I told him the truth about what I knew and when I'd known it, and I told him why I'd waited. I needed you to hear it from somewhere other than my anger, I said. Because I was angry. I still am. But you needed facts, not my anger. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She told me it was the first time." I didn't say anything. He looked at me. He's known me his whole life. He knew what my silence meant. "How long?" he said. "I don't know," I said. But the way she moved around that cottage was not the first time she'd been there. She knew where the firewood was. We sat with that for a while. He hired a lawyer the following week, a family law firm in Ottawa, one of the better ones. My daughter-in-law hired her own counsel within days, which confirmed that the controlled confession had been the opening move in something she'd already been preparing for. Whether the relationship had ended or not, she had been ready. The financial piece was complicated. They had a joint account and a joint line of credit and a mortgage. My son, once he'd started paying attention, found withdrawals he couldn't account for. Not large amounts individually, but consistent over 18 months, amounts that added up to just over $9,000, cash withdrawals mostly. His lawyer told him that in Ontario this could be addressed in equalization, that it wasn't theft, but it wasn't nothing either. I won't pretend the legal process was clean or fast. It wasn't. Ontario family law is built for slowness, and I think anyone who tells you different is trying to sell you something. The separation took the better part of a year to formalize. My son moved into a rental near Barhaven while it was sorted. He was closer to me, which I told him was a silver lining he was welcome to disagree with. He did not disagree. His wife, I have to work to remember to call her his ex-wife now, retained primary residence of the kids during the week because her schedule was more flexible. My son has them every second weekend and one evening per week, and school breaks are split. He fought for more, and his lawyer was honest with him. In Ontario, the starting presumption is stability and continuity for children, and disrupting the primary caregiver arrangement is difficult unless there is demonstrable harm. There wasn't harm. She was not a bad mother. I have never said she was a bad mother. I said she was a bad wife. Those are not the same thing, though I understand why people get them confused when they're angry. What he got was fairness, not satisfaction. There is no legal process in any province that gives you satisfaction, but fairness, equal division of assets, child support, calculated by the federal guidelines, a parenting plan that kept both of them in the children's lives. The man from the Subaru, I learned much later that his marriage had not survived either. His wife had written back to me 2 weeks after I sent the email, a short reply, 3 sentences. She thanked me. She said she'd had her own questions for some time and that my message had been the last piece she needed. She did not ask for anything further, and I did not offer it. I don't know what happened to him after that. I don't think about him much. What I think about is the cottage. I went back in April, after the ice came off the lake. I spent a weekend there alone. I put new sheets on the bed in the main room, and I moved some furniture around, and I sat on the dock with coffee in the mornings the way Evelyn used to, and I thought about what that place is supposed to be. It's supposed to be where my grandchildren catch their first fish. It's supposed to be where my son can come and sit on the same dock I'm sitting on, and feel some version of what I feel here, some continuity of the kind that you can't buy and can't replace once it's gone. It's supposed to outlast me, the way the things we build for the people we love are supposed to outlast us. It's still that. That part didn't change. That's the thing people forget when something like this happens. They think it poisons everything it touches. But a place is just a place. What makes it what it is who goes there and why. My son brought the kids up in July, his first time back at the cottage since everything. My grandson, who was 8, caught a rock bass off the dock on a Tuesday afternoon and held it up with both hands and yelled for me to come look. And I came out of the kitchen where I'd been making sandwiches, and I looked at his face and I thought, that's what this place is. That's the whole thing. We put the fish back. My grandson named it Gerald first, which seemed fair. I cooked dinner that night, and my son and I sat on the dock after the kids were asleep, the way his grandfather and I used to sit on the dock at a different lake in a different decade. And we didn't say much. You don't need to after a while. Some things between a father and a son get understood without the words, and one of those things is, I am here. I was always going to be here. That is not something that changes. You should have told me sooner, he said at some point. Maybe, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about how to answer that. I'd thought about it for months, actually. Whether I'd made the right call. Whether the 10 days I'd waited had made it worse or better or just different. Because I didn't want your first memory of knowing to be me telling you, I said. I wanted you to have a few more days of not knowing. I know that sounds strange. He didn't say it sounded strange. He just nodded. We watched the lights from the far shore reflected in the water for a while. She used your mother's quilt, he said quietly. Not angry, just sad. I know. I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry about, I said. I meant it. He had nothing to do with that. He didn't bring her there. He didn't let her in. He was a man who worked hard and trusted the person he'd promised to. And she broke that promise in the place his father had loved most in the world, and none of that was his failure. I told him that. He didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to be okay, Dad. I know you are, I said. I know you are, I said. I know. The loon started up somewhere across the water. Morrison Lake in July at 11 o'clock at night sounds like nothing else I've ever heard. Evelyn used to say that if you could bottle that sound and sell it, you'd never need to work another day in your life. I miss her every single day. But I'm glad she didn't have to see this. And I'm glad I was the one who was there. I've thought about that night a lot since then. Not obsessively. I'm not built that way. But the way you turn a stone over in your hand when you're not doing anything else. Quietly. Wondering what it means. What I keep coming back to is this. The choices we make when no one is watching us are the ones that actually define us. Not the big public moments. Not the speeches or the ceremonies or the things people congratulate you for. The small ones. The ones in the dark hallway when you could go either way, and no one would ever know the difference. I could have walked out of that cottage and said nothing to anyone. I could have told myself it wasn't my business, that my son was a grown man, that families are complicated and I didn't want to be the one to blow it apart. A lot of people would have made that choice. I understand why. It's easier. It costs you less in the short term. But I've lived long enough to know that the easy choice and the right choice are almost never the same thing, and the distance between them is exactly where your character lives. My son didn't need me to protect him from the truth. He needed me to respect him on the truth. He needed me to respect him enough to tell it. There's a difference. Protecting someone from the truth is really just protecting yourself from the discomfort of telling it. I knew that. I've always known it. Evelyn used to say that honesty without kindness is cruelty, but kindness without honesty is just a comfortable kind of cowardice. She was right about most things. What I tried to do, and I'm not saying I got it perfectly right, because I'm not sure 10 days was the right amount of time to wait, was hold both of those things at once. The honesty and the kindness. Tell the truth, but tell it at the right moment, in the right way, so that it could actually land somewhere useful instead of just detonating. That takes something. It takes the ability to sit with discomfort without acting on it immediately, to feel the anger and not become it. That's not a natural thing for most people. It wasn't always natural for me. But it's a skill, and like any skill you build it slowly, over years, mostly by watching what happens when you don't have it. My son is going to be fine. I believe that without any doubt, not because things worked out easily, they didn't, but because I watched him face something genuinely hard and stay standing. That's what resilience actually looks like. It doesn't look heroic. It looks like a man sitting at his own kitchen table at 2 a.m, eyes red, still asking the right questions, still trying to understand, still wanting to be a good father even when his own foundation had just shifted underneath him. That's what I'm most proud of. Not what I did, what he did. And Morrison Lake is still there. The loons are still there. My grandson still wants to name every fish he catches, which tells me that some things hold, even when others break. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot.